So we can see here that corporate AI investment is 252 billion. The adoption of this technology is the biggest adoption that we've ever seen. And to this end, I will put a link to a tweet by Jackson Atkins about the newest developments in China. I'm going to show you a little bit from our software, Larkspur Executive, and I'm going to show you one feature that we've built that I think is very interesting and informative. Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Investing Counterpoint. I'm Daniel Sachkov, president of RiXtrema. Today we're going to talk about what is normally called AI. Now it's called normally AI, as in artificial intelligence. For those of you that have watched our videos, you know that I don't really believe it's intelligence, because I define intelligence as ability to choose, having a freedom of choice. And I strongly believe that these algorithms are still deterministic, even though they're pseudo-random. They appear to have a lot of degrees of freedom, but at the end, they are deterministic. Also, very importantly for me, a quality that has to be present with intelligence is creativity, meaning that you create something out of nothing. Basically, we're like humans, we're created in the image of God, and we can be creative. These machines cannot truly be creative. However, the fact that it's not intelligence does not mean it's not important or it's not going to change the whole economy, the world in many ways. In fact, probably it's even more dangerous in that way, because it can mimic qualities of intelligence. It doesn't have the intelligence sometimes to understand the consequences, to be truly creative, but it can be a brutal machine. So this so-called AI is a weapon. Basically, those people, whether you're a financial advisor or you're in some other area of the world, very few professions will not be touched by this. You're going to be like exterminated economically by the people who use this weapon, right? AI is basically a weapon. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means specifically, because we at RiXtrema, we do build these models, these neural networks. We've actually been building them since 2016, long before large language model was available through ChatGPT. Our whole business is built on language programming and all this stuff. So I watched progression of this ever since early 2000s, being a quant in finance. So I have like a perspective on what this is, what these AI models will do, how they will change the industry. Specifically, we are building tools for 401k AI advisors. Well, we call it 401k AI. And I'll talk about a little bit about our approach and specific tools and how we see this is going to be successful, right? How these tools will help our clients. But first, I'd like to address a couple of questions. A couple of questions are as follows. A lot of people talk about AI bubble, right? There's a lot you see on YouTube, it's a bubble, and there are lots of examples. We'll go through them briefly. That is the first question, right? Is AI a bubble? The second question is, how exactly how exactly can it benefit you? I think the dangers of AI is a very clear topic, right? And I'm not talking about AI taking over the world. I don't believe that. It's not intelligence. It doesn't have really agency. It will be doing the bidding of its masters. But of course, AI will primarily be used for surveillance. It will be used for manipulation of opinion and so on and so forth. But as any powerful technology, can also be used by us to try to defend our economic sovereignty, our businesses, our small businesses, our medium businesses, even larger ones. The question is AI in a bubble? The second question is, what is the highest ROI use of AI for us? By us, I mean people who don't have unlimited access to financing, who have no interest in manipulating or controlling kind of masses of people, who are trying to create our own economic livelihood and support the people who work for us, work with us, and so on. Okay, so let's delve into these questions. First, the bubble question. I think that clearly, very clearly, AI is not a bubble in the sense that most people mean. Now, I don't deny that there's always exuberance and froth and so on. Okay, so any investment in history, any technology in history that was breakthrough, that was revolutionary, to use a beat up word, was a bubble in some sense. Railroads were a bubble. There were a massive number of scams around them. Internet was clearly a bubble, right? In 2000, we all remember, or many of us remember that. So in some sense, of course, there could be too much investment and there could be exuberance, there could be a bubble. But I will argue here that AI is not even a bubble in the sense that internet was a bubble. In other words, it's still underinvested in some ways, and I will explain why. So first of all, First of all, let's talk about the investment numbers. I'm going to pull up a very basic question to ChatGPT, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but so I'm looking at the numbers here. In 2024 and first half of 2025, we had the corporate AI investment of 250 billion. Global VC investment about 132 billion, special generative AI funding of 30 plus billion, and then lots of other investments of 70 billion. Now, those are funds committed, they're not necessarily invested yet, but you can see the scale. And just the other day, there's news of new biggest AI data center built by Elon Musk, which is in Memphis, I believe, that I think is in the order of $30 billion, one data center, okay? So these kinds of investments are being made. The predictions for over the next few years is that it's going to be about 402 billion just the corporate side in 2026. So let's put it in perspective. When internet was started in 1990s, for the longest time people didn't believe that you can send a lot of data through it. People said, well, it's going to clog up, you cannot really do high quality video and so on. What they failed to take into account is that the investment will change things dramatically. Okay. And so the people that believe that AI is not scalable, I think that they're going to be mistaken, because this kind of investment will change the world. Now, I want to say that again, I don't believe that all of this is a good thing necessarily. I'm giving you a roadmap. I do think that this massive investment by people essentially who can print money will crowd out private investment, will also crowd out private interest. For example, access to water. In a lot of areas in the world, you're going to have more expensive water because these data centers need massive water amounts of water to cool them. It's also electricity costs and so on. So this will have a variety of negative impacts on people. I want to be clear about that. What I'm telling you is like there's a minefield, and I'm trying to walk you through it. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that the mines are good, right? So, but I want to be realistic. I want to live in the real world rather than in the world we prefer to inhabit. So in the real world, the investment is such that you will see just the scale of these models transform massively. Okay, and that's the first component of why AI is not a bubble and why AI is going to be much more transformative than people believe. We are very early. We are very early. Just these models became mainstream only a couple of years ago, and they're growing in importance. Also, there was a study by MIT that got a lot of publicity that is actually very hard to find the original study, interestingly enough, that said 95% of AI projects fail. Okay, so people like to grab onto that. Now, I have a different opinion on that study. If you read through it, first of all, it says something really insane. It says that according to the surveys that they've made, 90% of people, but they're not, the study is actually very shoddy because it's not always clear that it's 90% of people or people at 90% of companies, but it implies, I think, that 90% of people will use a large language model for their daily tasks, and only 40% of them, well, 40% out of 100, use an approved corporate model. In other words, they have an approved corporate AI, so-called, and then they will use something like a regular ChatGPT on their own, but they'll use it for work even though it's not really approved. Now, that's what that study says. I find it hard to believe that 90% of people already use it. If that is so, then the game is kind of over. But I do believe that it's a huge percentage of people. So more than half of the people in many industries will use a generative AI for answers, for strategy, and so on. And I still believe that the real uses of this technology is not even online yet. We're like in the internet where we're sending emails in the 90s. We're maybe looking at some websites, but we haven't seen the video yet. We haven't seen many, many powerful applications of this technology yet. So it's very early. Now, if you look at the 5% of projects that give ROI, those are AI agents. Okay, that's a completely new field, meaning that a whole job or series of jobs is automated. In other words, when you implement an AI agent, it's a whole workflow that's done fairly autonomously. Usually that means firing a lot of people. Again, I don't think it's a good development in the long run. I think quality will suffer actually, but it will happen. It is happening. So think about this. If 5%, we were very early on, these corporate investments only started 6 months ago, maybe 12 months ago. Already 5% of the projects are successful. This is not like a typical IT project, right? A typical IT project may increase productivity, I don't know, about what, 10, 20% at max. This is 100% saving. This is where they're going to delete a whole series of jobs. If 5% of those already are successful, That's actually very scary. That's actually very, very scary. So I don't believe that study really, in fact, that study contains data points that evidently show that it's not a bubble, like 90% of people using it for their daily job. Now, in general, so the first component I told you is the investment. People underestimate the amount of investment going into it, which does become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because technologies do work that way. When you invest a lot in technology, it will, people don't believe that if you build it, they will come, but it kind of does work that way. If all this investment will create the drive to replace jobs, even if sometimes the quality will suffer again. I think the quality will suffer versus the humans in many ways, but I think the corporations will not really care about that. So I'm giving you the real, the real data point is that the amount of investment in the number of people that are using it. So that's the second point, adoption. First is the investment, second is the adoption. The adoption of this technology is the biggest adoption that we've ever seen. So after 2 years of launch of the internet, kind of a big launch where people, I created my first email in 95, maybe 96. So the first 2 years of internet saw that 20% of people used internet. Only 20% of people. And that was the fastest adopted technology at that point. Now, much faster, much faster technology adoption with AI. I'll look up the number right now for you. At this point, if we say that we're 2 years away from the launch of large language models in mainstream, so 40% of US adults aged 18 to 64, according to Harvard, as of October 2024, 40% used large language models. According to them, 28% used it at work. Now, according to the recent MIT study that everybody took for evidence of AI bubble, it's actually 90%. Now, I said I find it hard to believe that it's 90%, but it's certainly above 28, right? So it probably maybe doubled since then. Maybe it's like 56. And then according to Harvard, last fall, 33% of people used it away from work. So this is essentially double the pace of the adoption of the internet. Double. Think about it. Internet was the fastest adopted technology in the history of the world. So the second component of why it's not a bubble is adoption. We talked about the investment, the self-fulfilling investment into the technology that will dramatically increase the uses. And I'll talk about the actual uses because most people still don't understand how this technology will be used for good things, quote unquote, right? For nefarious sense, I think we all do understand it. Faster adoption, huge amounts of investment, right? What is the third component? The third component is compact models. So the models that are much smaller. And to this end, I will put a link to a tweet by Jackson Atkins about the newest developments in China. So you'll see here that we're going to read through this tweet. You see here that for many years we assumed that the bigger data set and bigger compute is needed to run AI models. And that's still true to some degree. But there's been a number of breakthroughs in that regard. First of all, is Chinese DeepSeek technology. Most people don't understand that the DeepSeek, first of all, it's a game changer. It allowed you to essentially do the same thing with 100 times less resources, but it's not a fundamentally new technology. It's a transfer learning. It's like technology that was transferred, the knowledge that was distilled from ChatGPT and such models into a much smaller model that doesn't even need a GPU to run. So you'll be able to run it on a mobile phone. Already it's being implemented, but since then there's new developments, and you see it on the slide. Basically, it now takes about 1,000 data samples versus the models that were trained with 120,000 data samples. So more than 100x improvement, an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude improvements in the quality of the models. That means that the models get smaller and smaller. So what will happen is we're going to build very compact models for very specific tasks. I'm going to show you a little bit from our software, Larkspur Executive, and I'm going to show you one feature that we've built that I think is very interesting and informative. It's called Conversation Starter. So I'm going to pick on a particular retirement plan. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to pick on a particular CEO of the plan. You can see on the screen. It doesn't really, matter. I'm just giving this example. What we do with the Conversation Starter, this is example of the first wave of features of AI that work. In a Conversation Starter, we will take the CEO of a company, we'll find all the data on them, on LinkedIn, on the web, on the databases, press releases, everywhere. plus the plan data. We'll put it all in one place and we'll ask the model this. If I wanted to start a conversation with that person without being adversarial, right? I don't want to call the CEO and say, hey, your plan sucks, you're going to jail. Like sometimes that works, I guess, for some people. But I want to start a normal conversation with the person. What would I do? Okay. What I would do in that case is I would use our tool, Conversation Starters. It puts all of this data about the person, about the plan into the large language model and says, help me start a non-adversarial, non-confrontational conversation. And here are things it comes up with. You could see that, for example, it says that, can you share any insights from your experience at a conference, Sarah Week 2025, and how you believe that will change the future of banking? Okay, that is because this CEO was at this conference and spoke publicly about it. Now, think about it. When somebody emails you with, hey, you want to sell you something, hey, you have a problem, which it used to be the case, to somebody, hey, I want to talk about this conference experience, especially if somebody that writes to you with this question, maybe on LinkedIn, it's a peer or something, somebody resembling a peer, right? Maybe a little bit lower rank, but it's not just a salesperson. Now you're much more likely to respond. Here's another question. Can you share more about the success of your bank's digital bank in Italy and how that experience influenced your launch in Germany? So clearly, we know about this person that their bank launched this, digital transformation experience in Italy, and now they're doing it in Germany. So it's a completely holistic approach to where we're starting a conversation about things a person cares about now. And you can actually click right there, and below you'll see that there are publications and media, and there's a description of everything that's been read and links about that person, right? Where the person has been mentioned, where these questions essentially come from. You can do more, you have more of these conversation starters. They're up to 9 or even more of them. So this is the future of communication. I will say right away, that is not the end goal. That is a very cool, very important feature that I encourage everybody to use to start conversations. But the end goal is different. This particular feature uses a large language model, but we're going to actually put those questions, those conversation starters, into much smaller models. In the end, you'll be able to run it even on a mobile phone. Now, I'll talk about the big data in a minute, the bigger projects that we're tackling that I think will be the future of this industry. But to summarize, there are 3 reasons why I think that people who think AI is a bubble really don't understand what's going on. One is the massive investment that's flowing in, that's going to be self-fulfilling, and it's going to radically improve capability, right? The second thing that we've talked about is the adoption rate. Adoption rate is historically fastest ever. And you can see that. I mean, people are using it all over the place, and it does have real uses, right? Even though, again, I'm not saying it's all good. I think a lot of bad will come out of this revolution. I'm trying to pick the good things and kind of hand them to you. The third thing is the compact model. The breakthroughs in the data science allow us to have much smaller models that don't require these massive data centers. Now, that doesn't mean that data centers will not be required. They will be used for other things, for example, surveillance or training massive models and so on. But for our uses, the good news is you're a small business, you're a medium business, you'll be able to use those models without racking up massive like $1,000 bills every month, because the uses of the models I'm going to talk about are going to require a lot of context, meaning a lot of data. So you're going to have to put a lot of data in, and that's normally very expensive. But the breakthroughs I'm talking about that I showed you with ZTE in China and others are going to allow you to use the quality of ChatGPT 5 for pennies in your business to train a very specific model for your business, right? And we're doing that at RiXtrema. We're building a specific model that will do search for plans, but then there's going to be a different model that will present you with a retirement plan strategy. So all those things are going to differentiate, and you're going to be able to pick and choose and run them for pennies, okay? The last component of why I think people don't properly estimate the future of this technology is that the real uses are not even there yet. Okay, right now we are using it for some very cool things that really move the needle, but they're more localized features. Okay, have a conversation starter with this executive, write an email to this person, create a video about this plan. We have this very cool feature that I'll show you maybe another video where you can create a video about a retirement plan, a custom video. It's a very popular thing with our clients already. But all those are local things, right? We take a little bit of data and we create something out of it. The real big game is going to be when you take a lot of disparate data sources, put them on one place, and you get something transformative out. For example, we are building something called 401k AI agent This is a tool that will allow you to say something like, hey, I want all the plans in my area over 2 million, and you basically do it through chat, and then say, I want to start selling them, create a strategy. So for each plan, our model will ingest best sales practices, data about the plan, the press releases, earnings, executive data, who left the company, who came to the company, who was hired, and so on. Put it all in one place and we'll create a customized sales strategy for that plan. So, as an advisor, you'll see, okay, here's what you do with this plan. You talk to them, you send an email with this subject, you send a LinkedIn message with this subject, you call them, you direct mail them. It will actually map out a plan for you, and it will remind you every step of the way. It will write for you emails, it will write calling pitches, it will basically give you everything. You just say, I did it, and provide some feedback. And then this agent will learn, will ingest what you send back to it, and will adjust the strategy accordingly. So essentially, it's like your headquarters that will coordinate every step. You don't even have to remember, because it will send you alerts to your mobile phone, to your email. Hey, now it's time to send this email. I wrote an email for you. Press send. Now it's time to call. Here's what you say. And of course, as an advisor, you still have to review it and approve it, and there'll be compliance checks and whatnot. But it's going to be fairly autonomous. It's like your autonomous sales partner. Okay, that's one of the uses, this 401k AI agent. Now, notice how different that is from saying, I want to start a conversation with this person. Okay, starting a conversation with this person, you can still use a large language model for that, because the data you enter is relatively small. Actually, it is borderline, because there is a lot of data. But when you get to this feature where you're trying to create a strategy for the plan, that's a massive undertaking. That's going to ingest a huge amounts of data. It's going to be very, very costly. That's why using resources properly, having a proper model will be a game changer for this. Okay. Now, this is only used for us as a 401k AI prospecting company. You could think about other uses. You take the data, let's say you run retirement plans and you have all this data, you put it all in one place, and you have a model that you trained to find deficiencies and to uncover cost savings. It will come up with a whole strategy to optimize a plan. Now, I keep saying the word strategy. That's where the real use of these models is. You put a lot of data in, and it gives you strategy out. Because creating a strategy most of the time is not a creative process. It's really properly segmenting the data and drawing proper conclusions from it, which the models do very, very well. So when these uses go online, they're going to change a lot of things, because this is going to be a real improvement, not just in sales, but in costs. The lots of inefficiencies that happen now, logical inefficiencies, because the process was incrementally built, it wasn't thought through. You will get a roadmap for changing that. And it doesn't mean that humans cannot do it. It's just that right now, most of the people will not get around to it. It's very hard. It's very hard for us to ingest large amounts of data. Okay. It's very hard for us to get all this data on all these plans and come up with a strategy, or even on one plan. That's a big effort. Now, where will humans fit into it? If you are not left behind, if you have this technology, then you're going to be left with the human part. And the human part is the creativeness. You basically guide these models and say, okay, now this is too much of a pattern following. I want you to be creative here. Okay. And also empathy. Those models cannot do empathy. They're kind of sociopathic. You already see that ChatGPT drove some people to suicide, allegedly. I don't know. But really, the future, I believe, is, if we take kind of lower level, it's you using these tools, learning about them, but not staying behind, not assuming that it's a bubble, it will pass. It will not. Using them, adopting them on a grander level. As far as the education goes in the future, I believe that the human qualities that will matter in the new economy, a lot of the education that exists now will be gone, will be useless. Okay, memorizing things and so on, and a lot of the, pardon me, physics and chemistry that like people study in high school, it's really completely unnecessary. I think that the real education will go back to the classical education. You have to know math. If you know math, you're the master of these models. You don't even need to know programming anymore. It's helpful, but it's not necessary, because you have the models that can program. You need to know math. What else you need to know? You need to know linguistics, because, and I'll record a separate video. What people don't understand is that, and I was kind of under the impression that these models are going to be purely next token predictor models, which is not true. I think that if we delve into the linguistics at the core of it, we go way back. We go back to the Stoic philosophy, which has a very elaborate history of and philosophy of language. We go back to Sanskrit. Then there's a Christian theology that, obviously the logos is the word, and so on and so forth. Then you go to medieval times, there are so-called grammarians. Then we go to the 20th century philosophy, which is Wittgenstein, and really Wittgenstein is a very pale shadow of the Stoic philosophy. Kind of, I think that he didn't even read it. But the point is, all this delves into the idea that language contains the answers that we seek. Now, whether it's true or not completely, I don't know. But I'll record a separate video on the philosophy of it. But language does contain a lot properly used. So these models are going to be very powerful, and people that will be successful in the world will need to know linguistics. I know it's paradoxical. You say math and linguistics, it's like you're a technical guy or a gal, or you're a humanitarian. This is a liberal arts. This is a completely made up distinction. People who will be successful will know math and linguistics. What else they will know? They will know philosophy, because that underlies a lot of linguistics too, and math. Really, they're interconnected. And also they will know rhetoric, because as we know, these models are extremely good at persuading, and they will manipulate you if you don't know rhetoric and you don't know how to defend against persuasion. I will probably start doing more of this high level stuff. We'll talk about the linguistics, we'll talk about the math of it, we'll talk about the persuasion and rhetoric. But all these things I'm gonna apply to the technology. But your first immediate task, I would say, is that to try to really understand that people who say that it's a bubble are missing something very important, and things will go fairly fast, and you need to use these models. If otherwise, you're going to be like, using a horse when there's really tractors around, right? Or using an axe when there are people with rifles. This is what it's really going to be. And I know that sometimes people look at this and say, well, it's overhyped. And so far, it's used mostly for, let's write an email, let's write a business plan, kind of these mundane tasks that don't seem revolutionary, that save some time. Yes, they save a lot of time. But later we start getting into bigger things. Like I showed you conversation starters, where now it's not just time savings, it's a strategic way to communicate. But the real use is not even here yet. But it will happen over the next 6 months, I think, where there's going to be models that ingest a lot of data and can transform a whole process and get you to the end result. I hope you found this video useful. Comment underneath. We are, working on helping advisors, bringing this technology to advisors' hands, so you are not behind the giants, right? Because these giants with large AI centers, they tend to want to gobble up everything. It's like new feudalism, right? It's new fiats. But I think that technology always has this nice asymmetry where a smaller individual can defend very well if they know what they're doing, because they need 100x less resources to do what they need to do. And this is what we're trying to bring you, where you don't have $1 billion, you don't have 30 billion like Elon Musk, but you have, $300, and you can do something with that to really transform your business. Stay tuned for the next videos. I'll do a lot about this technology soon. Please comment what specifically, if there are any themes that you're interested in, that you want me to cover, more of the linguistics behind AI, or the philosophy, or the math, because I think all are important. Take care. We'll see you soon.